Hi everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Creating Spaces, Performing Arts in Sacred Places, Part 2. I'm Kristen Johnson, Local Arts Advancement Program Manager with Americans for the Arts. We've got a great program planned for you today, and I'm excited to introduce our speaker, but first, a couple of quick reminders. First, ArtsU is our e-learning platform offering a variety of training options to support your work in the field. Be sure to visit artsu.americansforthearts.org to view more upcoming events. Second, there will be time for questions at the end of this presentation. However, feel free to type any questions that you might think of in the moment into the chat box on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Just know that if Karen's in the middle of her presentation, she may not answer them right away. So just bear with us, and she will definitely answer that when we get to the Q&A portion. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Karen Delasi. As Director of Arts and Sacred Places, she's built and brought to a national stage a program that connects artists and congregations and also engages multiple civic, nonprofit, and funder stakeholders. Over the past 8 years, she's expanded this originally Philadelphia-based program in Chicago, Austin, and Baltimore. She also led the research report Creating Spaces, which elevated the artist space crisis conversation nationwide, and in the spring of 2016 opened the Philadelphia Design Center, the first of its kind in the country. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Karen to take it away.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Kristen, for the wonderful, warm welcome. And thank you, Americans for the Arts, for asking me to do this webinar with folks today. I love talking about my work, and that's exactly what this whole webinar is about, so talking about my work. So I'm just really excited to be able to share what I've learned with so many more people. So again, my name is Karen Delasi. I'm the Director of Arts and Sacred Places for Partners for Sacred Places. I've been at Partners since 2011, but my background is as a trained theater artist, and I've worked professionally in theater and nonprofit arts administration for almost 20 years. It seems difficult and hard to say that, but almost 20 years. So I'm coming at this work with congregations and houses of worship from very much an artist background, artist perspective. So I hope to kind of bring a little bit of both sides of this equation and both sides of these partnerships to the table as we kind of progress in these conversations. So to begin, I always like to talk about who is Partners for Sacred Places. So this is just a nice little snapshot of who is Partners, this organization that I work for. They were founded in 1989, and we are a non-denominational national nonprofit dedicated to the sound stewardship and active community use of older historic religious properties. As it says here on the slide, our roots are in architecture, heritage, and preservation. And over the years, we have evolved into a community catalyst organization. So I always like to put that last bullet point in this slide because I think it's important to note how our work has really shifted from something that's purely about the building, something that's very much connected to architecture and preservation, and something that's, whereas we're using the buildings as a focal point for positive community impact, positive community change. So really by saving these buildings, preserving these buildings, and potentially the congregations that are connected to them, then the greater community and the greater neighborhoods can benefit from everything that is housed therein. So that community catalyst piece, I think, is really important to kind of just note and lift up in terms of Partners' own journey and trajectory over the years. So that is Partners. Then what is Arts and Sacred Places? I get this question a lot too. So Arts and Sacred Places is a program of Partners. And what I do basically is to bring together artists and arts organizations who are looking for space and match them with congregations or sacred places that have space to share and are willing to share it with artists. So that second half is very, very important, that willingness and openness to open their doors to artists and everything that that means. You know, they're doing that knowing that artists might carry a lot of things that may be unusual, you know. So knowing that is really important. And the arts program really focuses on that active community use piece of the mission statement that I said in the previous slide, that sound stewardship and active community use of older historic religious properties. So that's really what we're doing, and we're striving for relationships between the two that are sustainable and that are mutually beneficial. And we're doing that through primarily a process of mission and vision alignment, which I'm going to get into in a moment, but really so that it's really creating a strong foundation and a bond of this partnership. And as it says right there on the slide, it's about finding the right match, not necessarily a convenient match or the match that, well, this is the one that's down the street from me. It's like about finding one that really fits mission, and how those two are connected. So that is, that's kind of where the Arts and Sacred Places program really lives. So I thought it'd be great to include also a snapshot of the arts program that's been around for 8 years of Partners history, and you can kind of see a little bit of our own journey in this slide here. So the program started in 2011, and it was piloted in Philadelphia. The majority of the staff is here in Philadelphia, but we do work across the country. But because we are stationed here in Philadelphia, Philadelphia does have the benefit of being really our home laboratory and the place where we can really test things out and try things out. And also, obviously, Philadelphia congregations and artists in terms of this work really do benefit firsthand from what we're able to do. So Philadelphia has really become a home base of operations for us. As Kristen said, I've also been able to expand the program into Chicago, Austin, and Baltimore. We've done 55 total arts/sacred place matches. So that's not necessarily just 55 artists, though. I will say that in these matches, because the sacred places are so large, these facilities are so big, or there are artists that want to be there on a rotating fashion or want to have recurring agreements, then we can really get more artists into less spaces. So the ratio could be 5-to-1 or 3-to-1, but it's definitely very rarely ever 1-to-1, one artist to one sacred place. So 55 total matches, and we'll be starting work in Manhattan and Brooklyn in just a few months, so I'm kind of prepping for that work right now. We do work with long-term, recurring, and short-term relationships. With the, we kind of, lean more into the long-term and the recurring. We find that those long-term and recurring relationships are the ones that have a larger community impact in terms of positive impact for the congregation, in terms of positive impact for the neighborhood, et cetera. So that's where we really do focus our work, although we do help to a less extent with short-term relationships. The types of spaces, performance, rehearsals, office, storage, build space. As you notice, there's not a lot here for visual artists. That doesn't mean that we don't work with them. Our primary focus has been with performing artists, and that has more to do with the types of spaces that performing artists can work out of and the specificity that visual artists have depending on their medium and depending on their discipline, whether or not they need a lot of natural light or no natural light, or whether or not they're using blowtorches or kilns or things of that nature. It just means that the needs are much more specific and sometimes can be much harder to find. We try to have artists go into spaces that are more plug and play so that the artist isn't putting out a huge amount of funds in order to make the space something that they need. This way they can really move into the space and start working right away. So that's really kind of what we do. As of this past May, I can say that we've interviewed over 175 artists and arts organizations in these various cities and beyond, and we've interviewed over 140 sacred places. So those numbers probably should be updated from May of this past year to include this month, but the summer months are usually slow, so the numbers probably are around that same amount. The Arts and Sacred Places program, we also do space assessments for congregations, for houses of worship, kind of helping them figure out how to make better use of their space. I've also done arts market studies, so people are interested in opening a new space for artists, helping them figure out, is there a need for that space and what can the market actually bear? I've also conducted and facilitated town halls based on space, knowing how much, what, and those can be specified to questions that the congregation or the space or the artist is looking to unearth answers to. So I've done a lot of that facilitation as well. So that's a little bit about the program. I like to kind of give the information so it's a real basis for the whole conversation. So this mission and vision alignment, which is something that is at the core of the Arts and Sacred Places work. So most sacred places and arts organizations, it's certainly not 100%, but most of them work from an official nonprofit or at least a mission-based formula. So, mission, what we do every day. Why do I get up in the morning? Why do I go to this place of business? And what am I doing? What is driving me? So I like to say that it's based on more social profit instead of financial profit. So how am I benefiting society with what I'm doing? So that's really that mission work. The impact, what's the effect that we're having? So what does it impact any one of us, whether we're an artist or a churchgoer or a member of a synagogue? Like, what is the impact we're having on the people and places that surround us? Like, how are we impacting them positively? What's the vision? It's all kind of, funny now when you think about it, the banner, mission accomplished, but, what does the world look like? If you actually could say mission accomplished and we fulfilled it, meaning like we've met all of our goals, the world is as it should be, may it be someday, right? So, but what will the world look like? And then what are the values guiding all of that? So what are the reasons why we're doing this mission, why we want to reach towards this vision? Like, what is the end, what is the internal pushing of that? So, so this mission and vision alignment, it really becomes a focal point for the entire partnership. And it actually helps us go beyond that landlord-tenant model. So it really is a relationship. And I know that a lot of artists could probably look at this slide and we all have our elevator speeches. We know our mission statement forwards and backwards and upside down. With the congregations and houses of worship, it can be a little bit different given the divineness of some of their missions. However, we do try to get them to think about their ministries, their outreach, how do they reflect that mission on a very earthly platform, and how do they interact with people in a very real way versus the very divine way, very spiritual way, so that we can get to this place. So you could probably see how, going through this process of really breaking down your mission into these various principles, you could see how we can start to find connections. And that's really what we're looking for. What's the connection that matches this arts organization or artist with this particular sacred place? And how do we connect them in a way that is meaningful and fulfilling to them? So, know thyself. Temet noske, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. We, over the years, have thought about what are the important things for people to have conversations about, and what are the areas that you should be discussing with your team internally before starting a partnership process. So obviously mission and vision alignment, knowing what is your mission and how does it all function and work, personal compatibility, artistic content, decision-making process, finances, and the physical space. These are not necessarily in any particular order. but these are definitely 6 pieces that we find are critical to knowing about yourself before proceeding. It's about knowing where is your line in the sand. If you're going to partner with another organization, you know, are there places of compromise and complement, or are there places where that just goes too far and that's not something I'm willing to give up? So knowing what is your line in the sand. Also to know that if there's a problem at the start in any one of these areas, that's going to be a red flag, and that will continue. You like to think that, no, I can fix it, it'll get better, but in my experience from doing this for 8 years, sadly what I found is that if there is a disconnect in any one of these 6, it will just continue, and it's going to just be a burden on the partnership and a burden on the relationship, which is not at all what we want to have. The other thing, too, with working with artists and sacred places is to leave your preconceptions at the door. My experience has led me to realize that the perceptions of one are not the reality at all. Perceptions are not equal to reality at all. It's really a misconception. So I find that a lot of the work that I'm doing is correcting perceptions. So just to kind of know that about yourself as well. So I'm going to go through these 6 things one at a time. And there are photos here. I think I'm actually making a guest appearance right here in one of these pictures. But I thought it would be fun to see a space that was in a church that slowly got converted into a black box theater as just a background for the conversation. So you can kind of see where things were at the beginning and then where things ended up through conversation process, where we actually did really tick off all 6 of these things in terms of creating a space sharing agreement. And I'm also going to leave out, I put credits on all of these photos so you can read and see like who it is I'm talking about in the photos. It's not necessarily connected to any of the stories that I'm about to tell, so I'm kind of leaving the names of the exact houses of worship or the exact artistic organization out so as to just kind of have a blank slate. But I think these are stories that are really important to tell. So mission and vision alignment. Obviously, this is the first thing I have to talk about, and again, at the core of everything that we're doing with the Arts and Sacred Places program. So in this case, I would love to tell a story about a theater company that actually had a mission about telling stories that went untold. And it was something very succinct, something very simple like that. I know I'm not doing it verbatim, but it was something along those lines. And I will say that the church that they were partnering with, it really resonated with them in a way that I don't think they were expecting at all. And certainly the artists weren't expecting it either. The church apparently had a homeless ministry. They had support groups that were housed there for a very long time, AA groups and A groups. So they see a lot of people who they felt their stories went untold, who they felt this artistic group, this theater group might be able to tell their stories in a new way and really amplify those stories because, you know, as you can imagine, they're coming in, say, for a homeless ministry, maybe they're getting a safe place to sleep and maybe they're getting food. And as members of the congregation, they're hearing one-on-one from these folks. And they viewed the theater company as a potential way, like, oh, they could be telling the stories of the people that are coming through our doors and really reflecting back on that into society. And that was really the basis for a lot of their partnership and their relationship. There was another group that was a dance company that was going into a different church that did a lot of work with children and music, but the church itself wasn't really big into dance. It wasn't a part of their core, and it wasn't something that necessarily was reflected in even their church services or anything like that. So the pastor of that particular church actually went into the Bible itself, talking about mission and vision alignment right there, and used a quote, I believe, from the Psalms, and David danced. So that resonated with the congregation in a very strong way, so as to realize that dance was indeed a part of themselves, even if they themselves didn't reflect that outwardly, but they could see how the dance company being in their space could be a reflection of that and of that joy and of everything else. So, so again, that mission and vision alignment is so important in understanding how to work with one another. Personal compatibility. You know, you could go to eHarmony and Match.com. You could go out and meet someone for coffee or lattes or a beer or a glass of wine, and if you don't get along with them, you know you're out of there really, really fast. This is absolutely no different. The personal compatibility absolutely matters. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to finish one another's sentences, although I've certainly seen that in some of the pairings that I've done over the years. I've seen clergy leaders definitely finish the sentences of artistic leaders and vice versa because they just get along so well. But I've also seen, you know, there was a daycare I was trying to put into a church, and there was so much suspicion and mistrust and just real personality clashes that stopped everything. And I would love to be able to say that, you know, that happened in the first meeting and then it was, you know, forget about it. But both sides continued to pursue one another to the point where, you know, we had draft upon draft of a space sharing agreement only to end with nothing happening. Nothing was ever signed. No agreement was ever made. And that personal compatibility just wasn't there. So if you're not connecting from the beginning, and if you don't feel like there's a there, you know, I would turn around and go in the other direction. So it really is important. Artistic content. This, obviously, you could put this at the top of the list for a lot of the people on this webinar right now. The whole point is to be honest and open with what it is you do as an artist. You're going into a sacred place. If there's an active congregation there, what you do and how you express it actually does matter to them. And that's not to say that they're necessarily going to say, you know, you can't take off your clothes and you can't use that language. Not at all. But it's on understanding what is the overall purpose of the content that you're developing, or, you know, what's the rationale for it. Really great, totally opposite example. There was a company that wanted to do WIT, which for those of you who are don't know about it, there's a play about a woman with cancer. At the end of the play, she has no clothes on. You know, her body dies. She goes into the next life, which you would think would be an okay rationale. But for this congregation, it was not an okay rationale. So it was really kind of a shock to the company that wanted to do it, and it was something that ended up not being, you know, something that wasn't done in the end. On the other side of things, I had another artist who did a lot of, not a lot, but would do homoerotic content from now and again. It's the expression of what they were feeling inside and felt like they
the leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes. Sorry, there was an interruption there on my feed. Said something about the leader was disconnected. So I'm just going to say that out loud so that Kristen can maybe try and fix that. Anyway, in that case, I encourage that artist to be honest with the congregation and tell them what they were doing. And in the end, the congregation actually did say that you know, they would never expect the artist to tell them how to worship, so why would they tell the artist what they could or couldn't express? So you really don't know what it is. So you do definitely have to ask for permission, not for forgiveness in that case, and really be open and honest with what your artistic content is. For the decision-making process, this is, I was raised Catholic. My husband is Jewish, so I know a bunch about those two faith traditions, and it was a large, steep learning curve for a lot of mainline Protestant faiths and other kinds of religions out there. And a great example is, you know, I'd been working with a Baptist church and in particular, and I had no idea that for the Baptist faith, at least this particular version of it, the congregation members actually vote on the final say on whether or not,
a space sharing agreement is going to go through. Well, had I known that, I would have had a much different approach in terms of how the artists interacted with the members. Maybe I would have had more opportunities for them to see the members en masse so that they could really have a dialogue with them. Turned out not to be a problem in the end, and everything was fine because they really wanted the artists there, but knowing what that decision-making process is so important. Another great example, in the Episcopalian faith, you could be talking to the pastor about conversations about sharing space, but in the end, if you don't have members of the vestry there, you're not going to get anywhere, because in the end, the vestry is the ones that make the decisions, the final decisions. And the same thing for the artist side, knowing how your board is going to react and how your funders are going to react. So what is the okay there? And really sharing what that decision-making process is with one another, I think, is so important. So really understanding what that is and being open with it. Physical space. So I'm going to go back to the Match.com eHarmony model for this. That physical attraction to one another. Is it possible for my art form to fit into that space without making a lot of huge capital improvements? Now, obviously, I'm showing you something that they're making a lot of changes to that particular space. However, what I would say is they were making improvements to fit it. They didn't have to do too much to the envelope itself. They were it was more just making it functional. So can that physical space house your specific artistic discipline? Or if you're a congregation and you really want to have dancers in your space, but you have a concrete floor, you're not going to have dancers in that space if you have a concrete floor. They can't use that space. Does your space have a lot of columns? Does your space have high ceilings? Is your space live enough sound-wise, or is it a dead zone sound-wise? What can it do? Does it have a lot of natural light? Does it not have a lot of natural light? So what can the physical space tell you should be there? How can the artist really plug and play into that space? And again, this is about making the right match. So does it match? So the financial expectations, obviously you have to know what you're capable of. So it's just like if you're an individual buying a home, knowing what your organization can sustain on a monthly basis in terms of rent, in terms of upkeep, in terms of utilities, etc. What is that baseline is so important. And to really be open and honest with it, because if you can't meet those demands, then you shouldn't go into the partnership. There's one thing about taking risks, and then there's really taking too much of a risk. So being safe with that choice is always, I think, a better one. And there's a lot of ways you could meet the financial burdens, too. A lot of the artists I've worked with have honestly, they've collaborated. So as I've said before, there's the ratio doesn't have to be 1-to-1, so one artist per one sacred place. It can be more like 3-to-1 or 5-to-1. So there's a lot that can be said there. Sometimes a congregation is asking for too much. So on their financial decisions, it's for them to figure out how much money does it cost to open up the doors, how much money does it cost to turn the lights on, and once they figure out what that cost is, they can make an active choice whether they're going to subsidize the artists or whether the artists are going to add a little bit to the pot in terms of helping to upkeep your building, helping to keep the roof over the head and keeping the plumbing going and things like that. So what is your financial situation, and being honest with that. Again, does the space fit your artistic needs without putting a lot of capital dollars into it? If you put a lot of capital dollars into it and it ends up not working out down the line, that's a problem, and you've just spent a lot of money to do it. What does the space tell us can be in there? So really want to kind of emphasize that. I don't think I can't overemphasize it. So that's really where all that is coming from. So mission and vision alignment, I had mentioned this before, also means that you ask for permission, not for forgiveness. these partnerships are built on a basis of trust, and they can really create these strong foundations of trust that can overcome future hurdles. Can you imagine what, for that company that I mentioned that did kind of, quote unquote, controversial work, if they hadn't been open and honest with the congregation and they had done that work anyway, what would have been the ramifications of that? And understanding that it needs to have that strong foundation in order to get over that, so that they can actually proceed with, embrace their future together, which is actually what happened. And sorry, I've lost my notes for a second. So as you can see, this was actually a photo from a project that I just completed. And you never really know you may know your mission, I should say, but you may not know every single artistic content piece that you're going to be putting out there. You never know what you'll be reacting to in terms of the political climate, in terms of the environmental climate, in terms of your neighborhood changes. Maybe your art form is based on any one of these particular things as a reaction to it. So sometimes it's really the open communication, keeping that line of communication, being honest about what it is your mission is, how you reflect it outward, and then as that changes and morphs based on what you're responding to out in the universe, how the congregation or the church or the sacred place or the mosque or the synagogue should be looped into that conversation. And knowing on the other side, what is the sacred place interested in? What are their ministries? What are their outreach programs? And understanding what certain sensitivities are. What's interesting is that in some of my conversations with sacred places, when I talk about artistic content or permission, they don't go directly to the things that I always think that they would go to in terms of, bad language or obscene thing, quote unquote, obscene things. They go straight to, will this hurt a group I'm trying to help? So will this hurt, the fact that we have a place for abused and battered women in the evenings, and is what you're trying to do going to undermine that work, or is it going to support it and highlight it in some way? So what I find is that it's not these kind of on the surface issues, but it's these other stronger, deeper ones that really kind of come to light, so to speak. So building up that trust and building up that sense of permission makes for stronger relationships between the two. The return on investment on these partnerships is high. I really love this photo from Curio Theater Company that did this production of 12th Night at Calvary United Methodist Church. As you can see, the church is like another character. They were using the space to really, as a part of their piece. So the sacred places benefit by filling their empty spaces with people, in this case artists, and their audiences that are invested in the facility's success and revenue generation. So think about what would happen if a for sale sign went up on this building, that there was this artistic piece, felt connected to it, it connected outwardly to the community. Now what? But by putting artists there and getting audience members in there, or even if it's an education program, you're getting children, you're getting parents, or maybe adult education, you're getting more people into the space and more people benefiting from that space being made available to the artists. For artists, you're benefiting by having a stable creative home at a generally, not 100%, but a generally below market rate that you can afford. So really it ends up being a good investment. And this is a total soapbox for me, but I really do strive to keep artists from purchasing their own space and becoming facility managers. And I have a list, as long as I am tall, of different clergy leaders and lay leaders who would love to talk to you about what it means to take care of a space and to care for the building. Because in the end, it really does take away from your creative work and your capacity to create work, because you're worried about roof leaks and the plumber, and you're worried about the snow removal and the trash pickups, and you're worried about all these other things that happen when you buy or own a facility versus spending all that time you would spend on the facility and putting it into your creative work instead. So, you know, and at the same time, it's like you're helping out another community member, right? So you're in a space that belongs to the community, belongs to all of us rather than to the few. So by you being in that space, you're really helping to maintain it for the greater good. So I really do believe that the return on the investment of these partnerships is quite high and is something worth investing in, as this picture and all of the pictures have, hopefully you've noted. So I may have gone a little fast, so, and there was a couple of interruptions for me. I'm sorry about that. There were some things happening in my ear that I didn't quite understand what's happening technology-wise. So I would love to entertain questions if people have questions, or even comments, or if you want me to address something else that you think I haven't addressed, I would love to hear from you now.
Thank you, Karen. Everybody, this is Kristen again. As Karen said, we're now going to open it up to you guys for any questions that you might have. You know, specifically, are you working in your communities, and are you thinking about building these types of partnerships? You know, what questions would be useful for Karen to answer for you? Just to give you guys a moment to think about any questions that you have. Karen, for those on the line that might think that they have those opportunities to build relationships between their arts organizations or their artists and sacred places in their own communities, what should people think about and kind of bring to the table at a first meeting with a sacred place?
Definitely bring, I would say, bring your collateral pieces. What are some postcards or programs, some things that you've done recently? Do you have your mission statement clearly stated on any of this material? Bring along a board member of yours to really show that there's a further commitment. It's not just you. Definitely make sure it's the leader of the organization, of the arts organization, and not just, well, this is our administrative assistant. Like, you need to show that there's this greater commitment to it. Know what your finances are. I'm not saying that you have to necessarily have that conversation at the first meeting, but you should know what it is your financial, what it is you can financially handle at that point. And also know, again, like I said, like, what are the physical attributes that you're looking for? Don't go in there thinking, well, we could raise money and then insert this or that or the other. Go in looking for certain aspects of a space, particularly with sacred places that tend to have, you know, they can have large rooms with wood floors, and some already have stages in them even. Some already have seating. Some already have audio equipment. Some already have pianos. So knowing, like, make your kind of list of what are the physical attributes that you're looking for within a space. And if you have a mission statement that you think can reflect outward in what a sacred place might also be interested in doing in terms of the community, come with that too, and know how it is your work could be a reflection of what it is they're trying to do within the community as well. And I always think it's a good idea to at least do a little research on that particular faith denomination. What is their core belief system? You may not be able to kind of pinpoint it exactly, but I find that if you do Google the name of the congregation, you can, some of them should have a website. Some of them will at the very least have a Facebook page. and you can learn a little bit more about what it is they do and how it is that you can reflect back on that. I know it can be very daunting to try and participate in these partnerships. I always think, I go back to the 6, and I can kind of go back there now to those 6 pieces. I think it's always good to kind of have this as almost like a checklist. Have I thought about all of these things? Do I know what's important to me as an organization? And you know, how is it that I'm ready? Also, have I thought about what it would be like for my organization to be housed within a sacred place in general? You know, am I okay with my work being housed within a sacred place? And that's, you know, I'm not, you know, making a judgment call either way, but to know about that about yourself, I think is really important before you actually go into a space. I mean, even looking at this space in the picture, it's obvious, you know, what the space is or was. So, you know, that can be, you can either really embrace that or not. I will say a lot of these spaces are really beautiful, and you will be getting a space that is quite unique and unlike anything else. So you're not going to get some kind of warehouse cookie cutter space. You're really getting a space that was built with a lot of love and a lot of care to attention to detail. So.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of other questions in the chat box.
Oh, I don't see. Oh, wait, there they are. Oh, I'm so sorry. I wasn't seeing any of these. So one of the questions, how can state arts agencies help to promote these types of partnerships? Thank you, Kayla, for asking that. Well, I think that's a great question. I know I always make myself available to state arts agencies, and I've had a lot of conversation. In Austin, in particular, the city was really integral to us making connections with artists. And even if it's a matter of, you know, talking with perhaps some of the dioceses or different judicatories or faith leaders in that particular city, region, state, to know, because they can really kind of put the message out to their broader network about which congregations are eager to share space with others. I know just in our office just this afternoon, we had someone from the Episcopal Diocese of Philadelphia here talking about that very thing. So really wanting to put that information out there. So those folks exist. And I'm, you know, if you, I'll go back to the slide with my email and phone number on it, but if you want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to talk to you about what might be available in your area to, you know, or how, like, I can perhaps have a conversation with you or with your team about what might be possible. So I'd love to have that conversation, Kayla. Christine Staples, among partnerships which have been established, how do they handle taxes? Churches do not have to pay property taxes, but if someone who doesn't have nonprofit status rents from them, the church has to pay property tax on that portion. That is a great question, Christine. And what I have to say, 2 things. One, I am not a lawyer. Second one is that it depends on the state or the county or the city in which your congregation is, on whether or not they're going to have to pay taxes. So I know that as far as the Fed is concerned, again, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that the federal government currently it's not a bridge they're willing to cross. So I will say that. In terms of different states, so I know Pennsylvania, it is also a bridge they're not willing to cross. So I know in Pennsylvania we don't have that particular issue. In some other places, they do have that particular issue. And that is where I will point you right back to that mission and vision alignment piece. Here's the thing. They may say, well, you're a church, so how is this dance company worshiping God? Or how is that, how does that equate with one another? And that's where that mission and vision alignment really comes into play. Because if you can succinctly put before your space sharing agreement, and notice I always call it a space sharing agreement. I'm not calling it a lease, I'm not calling it a license, but I'm calling it a space sharing agreement. If you put before there, what are the connections between this faith institution and this arts institution, you are really making it very difficult for them to make the case that this arts organization is not a reflection, a different expression of your mission as a faith organization, if you're connecting the two. So that mission and vision alignment is so important in that way. So when I talk about the company that said, telling the stories that go untold, and that congregation that had a homeless ministry, you put that right at the beginning. And what I would say is that it does. It's not a separate mission. It's a different expression of it. So it's not necessarily like getting around it, so much as like, this is why we're partnering with one another. So, and I will say too, because now that I'm looking at your question again, the nonprofit status does, I guess it can matter. Most of the partnerships I've put into place have been a nonprofit with a nonprofit, but I will say I still have them do that mission and vision alignment work. Or even if you're trying to be an incubator, a business incubator for someone who's a for-profit, again, you're connecting to that person's mission. If this is somebody who has, suffered or had a hard time getting on their feet, and you're a congregation and you are helping them by giving them incubation space, and they're giving you a little bit of money for that as they maybe get some profits in, I don't see how that's not mission related. I see that as being completely mission related.
Great. So we'll do one last call for questions. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box. But I'm just wondering, in the meantime, if Karen, you might have any kind of last, final closing thoughts for people as they're embarking on this. As they're looking at these types of partnerships, is there anything else that you want to say or to re-highlight maybe that you've already said?
It's probably so much. Obviously, I'm trying to pack a lot into a little span of time, but again, that permission, not forgiveness, and being open and honest with what it is you do, I think is a bedrock, particularly when you're talking about partnering with a sacred place, because you don't want to have your partner, that congregation or that sacred place, to be in an odd position where they're left, being defensive because they don't know what it is you do or how it is you operate or what it is that's important to you, and keeping those lines of communication open. I feel as though sometimes what I am doing is a little bit of relationship therapy. So about bringing folks together that maybe didn't see the benefits of one another until I brought them to the table and got them talking a little bit. And, honestly, it's always good to, share a meal or go somewhere for coffee. I feel like kind of getting out of an office or getting out of a sacred place setting or whatever and just talking, even casually, I think that's about building that relationship up as well. So, I always recommend doing that too.
Great. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box, so we're going to go ahead and close things out. So I want to thank you, Karen, again for presenting, and thank you for everybody that tuned in for today's webinar, Creating Spaces, Performing Arts in Sacred Places. Just a quick reminder that this webinar was recorded and will be available for replay in 24 to 48 hours. So be sure to visit us at ArtsYouth on AmericansForTheArts.org to view other training opportunities and resources. And thank you again for tuning in. Thanks, everyone.